we're going to go over something called hinge points. To me, hinge points are really, really interesting because it just showcases how our body can literally adapt to the stresses we place on it. And that's the whole beauty of our bodies, that it constantly adapts to the feedback or stimulus that we give to it. And working in a society where our environments are not built to what we're supposed to be presents many, many, many challenges as to why we end up injured, tight, this is sore, my knees are bugging me, things like that. And I think get this going in the right context, like I think a lot of people miss the whole boat on this concept of I woke up and my neck hurts or my shoulder hurts. I'm going to go see a physio, chiro, massage, and it should be better. In theory, yes, they can help subside the effects of pain, improve your movement quality, and get you back to doing what you do every single day. But we've never actually got to the root cause to what we're trying to figure out or why that's happening. So an example is like, you have high blood pressure, you go to your doctor, here's high blood pressure meds. It helps you right there and then, but it doesn't eliminate the main issue of why you have high blood pressure, right? Things like diet, exercise, sleep quality, those things are going to fix that. But people prefer the faster way because it's like, well, I don't have time to do that kind of shit. I need to like go on with my day. I need to be able to pick up my kids. I need to go do this and all my responsibilities and being an adult, which fucking sucks. That kind of shit, right? But if you look at this whole kind of extended healthcare system where people go to chiros, physios, and RMTs for musculoskeletal issues, they almost kind of expect the same thing. They kind of expect that when I go see this medical professional, my knee, ankle, hip, low back is going to get better and I can go right back to what I was doing. Sometimes that works out. Maybe you have this like amazing practitioner that just has that gift that the moment they lay their hands on your shoulder, back, hip, whatever it is, they know exactly what to do. Sometimes, most of the time, you get that period of like, oh, I feel better. I'm going to go back to what I'm doing. And then you're back to square one. Why is that? It's our environment, right? I've been saying this on the podcast for so long, and we need to start realizing it. Like if you look at an evolutionary standpoint of Homo sapiens, which is us, like us human beings, 1,000 years ago, or whenever our species of who we are finally existed, we were meant to do certain things. Now, in our world today, we fucking sit all the time. We don't move like we used to. We don't eat like we used to. So that's going to present some challenges down the road if you continue going down that path. But for some reason, people just assume that this is normal. Like we have all this technology that makes our life easier, but at the same time, it's also kind of like crippling us. Like I move every single day. I exercise. I try to eat healthy. I try not to consume too much alcohol, even though it's fucking beer is delicious. I do all the right things, but like my back gets tight. My hips get tight because I'm on my fucking laptop. Like literally right now, I'm on my laptop for a good 30 minutes. And before this, I was like working on my social media for 90 minutes. And it's already starting to add up. Where, maybe 1,000 years ago, I would wake up, go walk somewhere, go find food, come back. Like there always would be something, right? So literally our environment is causing us to adapt to it. It's making us adapt to it to become more efficient at it. So literally every time you sit down, your body goes, oh, we've been here before. You've done this multiple times. I'm going to try to become more efficient at sitting for you so then you don't burn as many calories. Because when we burn calories, your body goes into a state where like, oh my God, I don't know when we're going to eat next. So I got to like preserve our energy. That's why when you start exercising and, you're doing lunges by like rep number 5, 6, 7, 8, you're not going as low. You're trying to compensate. You're trying to cheat because your body's like, oh my God, what are you doing to me? Like, let's preserve our energy. Let's not die, right? Kind of going on a tangent there, but I wanted to give some context of why hinge points happen, right? We're adapting to the environment placed on us. Good example here. So this is a flexion hinge. So for the most part, when people do their everyday steps, so say, today's Sunday, and if you're like me, you like cleaning the house on Sundays to make it fresh and organized for the week before you mess it up again. And say you have shit laying around the house from Monday and you go decide to pick up box, chair, fucking cat, whatever it is. Most people, at least the general population, will end up hinging through their spine and not through their hips here. This is the typical position that most people fall into, and repetitively, over and over and over again, your spine's not going to like that. It's going to eventually tell you to F off. Kind of stolen this from Dr. Stuart McGill. He does an assessment where he'll ask his patients to take off their shoes and put on their shoes, and he watches how they hinge. Is it through the spine or is it through the hips? Most of the time it's the spine. And already we have one clue of this may be the reason why you're experiencing back pain, not necessarily even low back pain, right? It might be just pain through here. Think about this. Say this is your natural pattern, flexing through, this is called kind of your TL junction. Imagine that you're so used to doing this instead of using your hips. So every Sunday you decide to clean and pick something up, you're constantly doing this. And it's funny enough because a lot of people will end up getting a sore back over the weekend. And us as practitioners, we're constantly like trying to figure out like, what did you do differently than what you do during the week? And, in the summer, it's usually, we started gardening or planting crap. So you're bending over for long periods of time doing this, or you help someone move. Or in the winter, it's like, I had to shovel snow and I haven't done that in a fucking year and my back is out, right? Things like that add up. So I mentioned like TL junction. TL junction is literally an area where this area here is your lumbar spine, and then this is your thoracic spine. A lot of hinge points tend to happen between the lumbar section and going into the thoracic area. So kind of like that T10 to T12, which is like your thoracic vertebrae. And these are just abbreviations for that. But usually that's where people will have their hinge point, and they've literally taught their body that don't use your hips to, drive back. Instead, let's use this area that's not designed for hinging whatsoever. It's meant for flexion and extension and some lateral flexion as well and rotation, but not hinging with load, which most of us do. So now what you're ending up doing is you're teaching your body to be like super mobile here because you're constantly asking for it to move, which makes your lumbar spine learn how to stay stiff, and your thoracic spine above this section becomes stiff in order for this to move. So it would be equivalent to be like, I'm going to only use my elbow from here to here, here to here. So this motion of flexion to extension is going to be really mobile. But then when I want to go past extension from this point to here, it might look like it'd be like a challenge to extend it. Maybe that's as far as I go, and then that's it. And then, but here I'm just like super loosey goosey, right? It's literally the same thing. Or, say you broke your forearm and now you have a cast on there. And when you take the cast off, it's going to be very difficult to get pronation, supination, because you've literally had it in a cast where you can't move it, right? Similar process. It takes time to relearn that mobility and flexibility, but if you do the right rehab, we'll get you there. So now we have this super mobile position. Lumbar spine is stiff, thoracic spine is stiff. When I have a new patient, a new client, I take them through something called the functional range assessment, which is a very, very thorough assessment for the body for every single joint. One of the things in there is that we look at how the spine moves. So one of the things we do is the cat-cow from yoga will find people's hinge points where in this picture, the arrows literally point to that TL junction that we were just talking about. So say you're doing your cat-cow, you'll literally see that primarily all the movement will come through this one little segment in this area, right? I will literally see, someone start in the big rounded position and they're supposed to start at their tailbone, but the movement initiates here and then maybe bounces back, then back here, then this doesn't move at all and this just starts moving completely. And then maybe the thoracic spine doesn't move at all. And it's just all of this over and over and over again. And usually, like, without even getting the history of the person in front of me, because I always ask at the very beginning of every assessment, like, name all the injuries you have, anything that's hurting, anything recent, surgeries, car accidents, everything. And a lot of times people don't tell you what actually is going on. And when I see that hinge point, I literally will point my fingers to where this picture is pointing to and like lay it down. And I'm like, do you ever get tight and back pain here? They're like, yes, all the time. And I'm like, and they're like, how did you know that? And I'm like, well, you literally have a hinge point where every time you try to move your spine, this is where it happens. This is quite common in yogis because when they do any kind of like toe touches, or if they're standing and try to go down to the floor, they don't shift their hips back into a hinge. They use their lumbar spine to fall into the stretch, and they tend to come back up utilizing this one section. Is it a bad thing? This is where you can start making the argument where if you're a seasoned yogi that you've been doing it for like 10 years, maybe a hinge point is not too bad because it's required for your sport, your daily movement practice. But say you are, again, Sally Sue, mom of 3, that's an accountant that sits all day, maybe yoga might not be the best choice because you're going to, one, develop a hinge point. You probably have low back pain. Your lumbar spine is already probably stiff. And now you're going to add this extra stress. Now let's go the other way. Say you're that seasoned veteran yogi and you want to start strength training. You really want to be able to deadlift heavy. And I've had this topic on my show before with Dr. Sue McGill. A yogi going into a gym where her or his body has completely adapted to the movement requirements for that practice gets thrown into the opposite of that, where it literally needs stability and movement through hips and not spine. This yogi, this person is definitely going to get back pain and fuck up their shit a lot more than whatever else is going on. So it kind of is a double-edged sword when it comes to hinge points, depending on what you do. Now, another thing I want to show, not one, so less flexible person, but again, TL junction, where probably lumbar spine is super stiff, but this person moves here very, very, very well, and then it's super stiff here. Right? It's a common thing that I see over and over and over again. But the other thing I wanted to show is, speaking of hinges, one, I would want to teach someone how to utilize their hips to deadlift properly. But if someone is super stiff, like this guy, this is what's going to happen. So a typical like drill of learning how to hinge with your hips is taking a dowel. This guy is like a 2x4 for some reason, but having the dowel, and imagine if the guy was upright standing, the dowel in contact with the tailbone, middle of the shoulders, and the back of the head. And then you ask the person to keep all 3 points of contact and push their hips back into a hinge and then back up. So you literally try to get them to do this, to here, and then back up. If someone has a hinge point, and I know this guy is probably like struggling to get this, because a lot of times when you find pictures like this from other people's blogs or whatever it is, they're trying to like showcase their point. And usually trainers or therapists or whatever they are writing the article move pretty well. And it's actually really challenging to do exercises wrong. It's like, it's so awkward and it hurts. If we have that hinge point and you're used to always using your TL junction and not your hips, your hinge is literally going to look like this. So that yogi is most likely going to look like this, trying to deadlift substantial amounts of weight. And that's not going to look pretty or feel great. So let's say someone's a little bit more, this image is very small, a little bit more athletic. And this usually happens to CrossFitters, Olympic weightlifters, and some powerlifters. You can see that this dude is well developed, right? Pretty strong back. But if you can see, like, I'm like even trying to get close to see it, the arrows pointing at that hinge point, which is like right here. You can already see how the spine is like arching this way, right? Because one, it could just be a cueing thing. It could just be the whole, like, when people say like, oh, suck your shoulders back and down, and automatically you like start doing this. And I can already feel that like TL junction being like this right now. And people just fall into that habit. And also when you think of like CrossFit in general, or just Olympic weightlifting, say you're snatching and you're trying to do this and you start arching your back to get into a better position, those things add up. So now imagine every time you go to the gym, you think you're doing the correct way of an exercise to like pin your shoulders back and arch up, chest up, but you're just creating a hinge point in extension, compared to like that first photo that we saw where it was a hinge point in flexion picking things up. And like this can happen the opposite, where these erectors end up being overdeveloped and same problem happens. I have another photo like that. This is just an extension pattern, similar to from like the SFMA, where you ask the person to bring their arms up and then push their hips forward as far as possible. So you, again, see if someone can actually utilize their hips or if they're hinging through their TL junction. So this woman is, and you can see, like, look how well developed these, or like overly developed these erectors are. And you can literally see a crease of where that hinge point is at. So this person who does anything overhead is probably going to feel it in here over and over and over again, causing pain, flare-ups, whatever it is. There's also a lateral hinge, a little bit more rare, but it does happen. So say this person ended up, does the extension pattern, comes back to neutral, and then does lateral flexion. You should see like a nice like curvature of the whole spine going across, but sometimes people will have a lateral hinge at certain segments. And that's a little bit more complicated and like way beyond my scope of like how to fix that, because that's chiro, physio, RMT type of world. But these hinge points, when overly developed, you end up sticking to that pattern over and over and over again. And kind of the first steps that you need to do is teaching your body how to move all the different segments other than this one section in here. So we're going to take a trip to my YouTube channel. What I want to showcase here is different positions. So all those things that I just showed you were in a standing position, more an upright position. So actually, I'm going to bring this back. So to make it more specific, you would want to also imitate movement patterns of where your hinge happens and reteach the body. So something simple as like going into an upright position, starting in that big round position, thinking of getting at the tailbone. Look how the pelvis rotates, nice and smooth. And then head down, shoulder blades, mid back, low back, tailbone, right? One way of teaching it over and over and over again. But for most people, this is going to be very, very difficult, even in the version of the quadruped, where you're on your hands and knees and trying to do the same thing. Because if you're so used to constantly going through that TL junction, then most likely you're only going to be moving there. And sometimes like what I'll do when I'm coaching is I'll tactile touch along the spine and try to have people follow my finger along. But even then, sometimes that is challenging. So I have a yoga block that's going to have my chest pinned against it. And then from here, I'm going to think of doing the FRC cat-cow, where I'm focusing on moving lumbar spine, because now my thoracic spine is blocked. And now you can see I'm going back and forth. And this is usually kind of like the first steps on learning on how to utilize the lumbar spine. And I find that it's a little bit easier teaching this than like, okay, let's focus on thoracic spine first, because there's a lot more happening. Whereas with lumbar spine, I've just had more success. I don't know why, but teaching more lumbar flexion and extension interdependently from that hinge point tends to be a little bit easier than teaching someone how to get more thoracic mobility. Now, one way of also teaching some lumbar thoracic mobility, usually getting people to learn how to rotate. And in this case, I like going into a wide stance with my knees, squeezing the glutes, and slowly rotating back and forth while squeezing the block to kind of add that stability component to it, and just learning how to rotate. That's kind of step one. Eventually, I would like to teach people how to get into that flexion and extension pattern, but a lot of times doing it actively doesn't really give you the best result. It's also a good time to mention, if you guys haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, you definitely should, because I have a lot of stuff on here. So foam roller extensions. I don't know why this is not good quality, but it looks terrible. But anyway, in this position, I have my feet up against the box wall, whatever you need to do, and then go into foam roller extensions. The reason why I like this variation is that being in this position, having my feet up, naturally tilts my pelvis in the opposite direction to make sure that I'm not moving through lumbar spine. So similar to that last exercise where we pinned my chest down to the yoga block, now this is not going to move and I can focus on lumbar motion. Whereas this is the opposite, where we're locking out lumbar to actually move through thoracic spine to not utilize. And you can even see this way, I'm going to adjust to go a little bit higher. Based on my shirt, like you don't even see my lumbar spine moving. It's all thoracic spine, right? So something like that would help quite a bit. Hinge points, very, very, very common. If someone has low back pain where they're tied up in their thoracic spine, which is everyone, I would make a huge, huge bet that you have some sort of hinge point at some level. So it's kind of hard to self-assess. What I typically do if someone online was looking to get an assessment done, I do them online, no problem. Just reach out to me. I've done this a couple times when people reached out. They're like, hey, like I've been practicing my mobility, not getting really any better. Can you please do an assessment on me? And literally just over Zoom, like give me an hour, hour and a half, and we can go through a lot. If you have like, your living room and you have a bench, a chair, a dowel, a yoga block, things like that, like we can get really creative. And we don't necessarily have to do an FRA or anything like that. I've done way too many assessment courses where a lot of times, like even today, where when I have people come in person, we kind of like start with something. And then I'm like, you know what, I'm going to kind of go off the rails and do this instead. Like, oh, your knee's doing something interesting. Let's kind of like do these things instead. So it really, really depends. And I think this is another reason why people should get assessments done if they're going to start exercising. Like for the most part, a lot of people are those outliers where they can just go and start doing their thing. But at certain points, you're going to find yourself in a jam where you're not getting better, something keeps hurting, something keeps flaring up. And that's why you need a good assessment. But I think I'm going to end it there. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for listening. Hit the show notes, add me on Facebook, add me on Instagram, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's it from you guys. Until next time, thank you so much for listening or watching. Till next time.